Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore, where today we are going to talk about another interesting little chapter of the adeptus astartes, the Death Specters of the 13th founding, the same one that created the Exorcists. If you don't remember them or haven't heard of them, I highly recommend checking out my video on the Exorcists to get a general idea of the kind of crazy you're going to be in for here. Although, at least the Death Specters are not quite so utterly absurdly deranged as the Exorcists are. I mean, sure, they ritualistically sacrifice their chapter master to a Xenos artifact now and then, but hey, by comparison, that's still pretty normal. But I'm getting ahead of myself as per usual. The Death Specters were, as mentioned, founded during the 13th founding, late in the 35th millennium. The information about this founding is quite sparse. The only other loyalist chapter we know of is the aforementioned Exorcists, and they, oh lord, they went off the deep end. And the other chapter are the Crimson Sabres, who are not listed amongst the rank of loyal Space Marine chapters anymore. On paper, and I stress, on paper, the Death Specters are a successor chapter of the Raven Guard, sharing, of course, the gene seed of their Primarch Corvus Corax. And they have also inherited some of the traditional mutations of the Raven Guard, such as incredibly pallid skin, although the Death Specters also come with bright red glowing eyes. Just to hammer home some later suppositions. Oh, and their chapter symbol weapon is a scythe. Like I said, on paper. But sussy-wussy gene seed origins is not the worst of it by far. The Death Specters had been specifically funded as a chapter that would be given the responsibilities of one of the northernmost borders of the Imperium, a region of space known as the Ghoul stars. The region on the very fringes of the galaxy had recently suffered a massive incursion of what is by now an unknown foe. What we do know is that it had caused enormous damage to the Imperial population in the Ghoul stars and the neighboring systems, including having required an enormous military effort to eventually defeat. The precise scale and scope of that effort is unknown, but we are damned sure it would have been titanic because the campaign claimed the lives of 11 Space Marine chapters, completely wiped out. That's the kind of war that, fortunately for the Imperium, doesn't come along even once a millennia. Whatever they were fighting, it was seriously dangerous. There are, of course, as always, some theories as to what they were opposing, but sounds like inquisitorial made-up bullshit to me, at least, as they were supposedly at war with the Thexian trade empire. Now, the Thexians are... they can be hostile enough when provoked, to be absolutely sure, but first and foremost, they are infiltrators, using economic force, leverage, and trade goods to expand their influence. For them to have launched a campaign on this sort of scale and not have been exterminated in return seems exceptionally unlikely. And from the handful of snippets of information we do possess, the war was described as against some form of star-spawned plague and nightmare engines capable of slaughtering entire populations. Now that, and considering the sheer scale of the threat, Sounds a lot more like Necrons to me than anything. Maybe a Cathan shard, or, considering the old-school nature of the lore, a fully fledged one. As, bear in mind, back in the day, the Cathans were the masters of the Necrons, not the other way around. As murder machines, nightmare engines, a star-spawned plague. It would be a little bit early, as supposedly this particular conflict took place sometime in the 34th millennium. And the Necrontyr have only started awakening en masse relatively recently, but we know for a fact that there were Necron tomb worlds beginning to pop up around that time. And then, of course, there's Thrazen the Infinite, who's been bumbling about for an extended period of time by now. So whilst the timing doesn't necessarily fit perfectly, I like the idea of Necrons. Of course, the galaxy is a vast place, and there could easily have been some similar-esque enemy, or indeed a genuine star plague, or some other mechanical foe, or even some biomechanical threat, or hell, the usual demons, for all we know. The only things we know for certain is that whatever happened was really, really bad. Bad enough for the High Lords of Terra to order a new founding of Space Marine chapters, where some would be dedicated specifically to guarding that region of space. And a good thing, too, as there have been other unfortunate things popping up in that region since, like the Sith Fiends, who will, for a long time, be the primary antagonists of the Death Specters, though we'll get to them a little bit later. Now that the Death Specters had been fully funded and formed and given their mission, their very first chapter master, one Merrin Corcadus, went to the Golden Throne to take up his office and pledge himself officially to the God Emperor. However, just as he placed the relic blade of his chapter Aquaman down before the Golden Throne, a vision flooded his mind from the Emperor himself. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds awfully familiar. Yes, it does, but listen to me. Considering the proximity, it could be the Emperor. Keep an open mind and all that. Anyways, the vision was of a very specific point in space, on a very specific planet in space. Following his visions, Merrin took his newly formed chapter into the border regions of the Ghoul stars, to a world known as Occludus, and a specific area that would later become known as Logopol, the site of the chapter's fortress monastery. And deep underground, before the first brick was even laid in the construction of what would be a mighty bastion, Merrin found exactly what he expected to find. A great hollowed-out underground chamber, in the center of which stood a raised dais and a throne. Impossibly large, built clearly not for any mortal frame, and seemingly ephemeral, seemingly brittle, made out of some form of crystalline glass that looked as if it would shatter should anyone, much less so a space marine, sit upon it. And yet, Merrin Corcadus had seen this very throne in his visions, and knew what he had to do, informing his chapter that they would henceforth be in the capable hands of the chapter's chief librarian, their Mezazar. Merrin Corcadus marched towards the throne, turned, and sat upon it, still, silent. and never spoke again. At least not to the chapter at large. This throne, the Shariax, as the Death Specters came to call it, appears to be some long-lost artifact, presumably Xenos, but to be fair, there were elements of human settlers in this region of space as well, so, it doesn't have to be Xenos. And even if it were Xenos, the Golden Throne incorporates a fair bit of that tech as well, so it's not immediately inherently negative. And whatever the throne was, it did grant significant power, as the moment the chapter master sat upon it, a psychic signal, detectable even from high orbit, pulsed out from the throne. Precisely what the Shariax does is open to a great deal of speculation, but presumably it has something to do with the chapter's ability to read the strands and the ebbs and flows of time far better than virtually any other chapter, and also the ability to implant knowledge into time itself, something that even the Eldar could not possibly conceive of or replicate. As this system literally functions as a warning that can be communicated through time itself. When/if the foretold event occurs, the librarian foretelling it can be guided through time to whatever member of the Death Specters may be present and may be in a position to guide reality and faith in specific directions. That Death Spectre will then receive a message informing him of what it is he has to do, and of what actions and consequences may be required and may occur from his actions. The precise manner in which this message is communicated is somewhat vague and, in all due likelihood, varies from case to case, although, again, I hear some of you mentioning something about large, colourful birds. There are some similarities, to be sure, but there are other interpretations of this as well. Presuming that this was actually a message from the God Emperor, well, we know that Big E found the Golden Throne. We know that Big E has, on multiple previous occasions, incorporated knowledge not his own, shall we say, in the furtherance of his own designs, be that chaos powers, knowledge given to him by infernal creatures, or Xenos technology. It is not completely beyond the pale of rational reality that there might have been a second sort of Golden Throne, a prototype, or some form of Old One artifact constructed to fulfill a somewhat similar purpose. The enhancement, the empowerment of psychic powers for a very specific purpose. Like the Golden Throne acts like a lighthouse in reality and in the warp, perhaps this one was created specifically for the purpose of communicating through time and space. We know, after all, from the Eldar, that reality itself is somewhat pliant, and that the future can indeed be guided by the hands of mortals. It is not inevitable. What is to come is always there because of the actions of the living. Now, that also, of course, means that on some occasions you might have the misguided bumblings of the livings be the ones that actually enforce prophecy. But it should still not be viewed as inevitable. This is simply a trick of time and an unknowable and yet still vaguely recognizable future. Telling the future is an imprecise science even for the most skilled of Eldar seers, as was seen, for example, when the Eldar attempted to interfere in and prevent or play the Horus heresy by contacting Fulgrim, only learning too late that that was the wrong Primarch at the wrong time. And so, it might even be possible that the throne itself, the Shariax, does not necessarily have any particularly special power, but instead that it acts as a sort of alarm clock. Whenever an event marked for particular notice by the Death Specters Librarius occurs, the throne and its occupant then leaps into action, sending out or creating some form of psychic signal to impart the knowledge predestined upon its expected recipient. That, at least, is the optimistic and charitable interpretation of events. And to be fair, we don't even know if the Shariax actually is psychic in origins. We simply assume that it is because every person who sat upon it so far has been a psyker. And that's right, by the way, the throne has had multiple occupants, not just Meren Corcadus, because, well, it kind of sucks the life out of whoever sits upon it, thereby the ritualistic offering of a chapter master. Yeah. So, on occasion, the battery will need replacing. And whenever it does, the current Mesosar, the chief librarian, will lay down his mantle to the next librarian in line, and instead take up the title of Magir, Chapter Master, and ascend the Shariax to continue the prophecy. As, yeah, there's a prophecy involved in all of this as well. And the prophecy is extra sus. So, right. The prophecy speaks of a rebirth, of a recreation, of a new start, perhaps even. The specifics are, well, there are no specifics. Let's just be straight up about that. They only believe that there is going to be some sort of rebirth, some resurgence. This, of course, echoes a widely held belief within the Imperium as well, and certain sections of the God Emperor's most holy Inquisition, that the God Emperor will someday step down from the Golden Throne, or in some way be reincarnated. Indeed, as mentioned, there are entire branches of the Inquisition working actively towards this rebirth, who shares many of these ideas that one day a fitting vessel will come around, and the God Emperor will be reborn in the vessel's body, or the vessel will be the God Emperor. And the Death Specters too believe that one day their Kadash will come, which translates apparently into living chalice. Now, living chalice immediately has some implications. Living is obvious because the person sitting upon the throne is a living person, the chapter master of the Death Specters. But a chalice... Now, a chalice, of course, in and of itself has no purpose unless something is poured into it. And so, presumably, once the Kadash has been filled, the great resurrection will begin. Just between you and me, that sounds like some fucking demon nonsense. But details, it might very well be that it could be the rebirth of the Emperor, or some equally amazing miracle. For example, the Death Specters, whenever possible, retrieve the bodies of their fallen comrades, entombing them deep beneath their fortress monastery of Logopol, awaiting this resurrection. At which time, presumably, tens of thousands of deceased Death Specters will rise from these tombs. Totally sane and normal. Yes. Both of those things, please. Both. Which Incidentally, it brings me back to the previous mention of a star plague and the wiping out of entire systems. Huh. Wow. Let's not. Yeah. Wow, the next star plague is really gonna suck with a few thousand Space Marine corpses. Never mind that. I'm sure the Death Specters know precisely what they're doing. And hey, they have indeed carried out great services for the Imperium in the past. They have fought in many great conflicts and have achieved tremendous deeds. The Macarian Crusade. They fought on Armageddon. They fought during the Black Crusade. They've helped turn back hive fleets, or tendrils anyways, and their single greatest achievement came late in the 41st millennium, alongside the Black Templars and the famous Marshal Helbrecht. The Black Templars had concocted the idea of a particularly bold crusade. You see, the Ghoul stars were known as a hostile territory. Very hostile territory, filled with all kinds of cruel and inhumane Xenos monstrosities, and virtually no expedition into the Ghoul stars had returned. At least not since the whole Star Plague thing. But the Black Templars believed they could do better, and they set their sights on the extermination of one particularly annoying Xenos threat, the Sith Fiends. The Death Specters had previously carried out campaigns against the Fiends in the past, even getting so far as to reach their home world, Grave Core. But when they did, the Fiends had seemingly disappeared. And yet, once the Death Specters retreated, the Fiends re-emerged and continued their assaults on the frontiers of humanity's space. The Death Specters had simply contented themselves with countering their various moves and launching the odd extermination campaign here and there. The Black Templars evidently figured they could do better and on a larger scale. No precision strike towards Grave Core to deny the aliens a home world here. No. A focused campaign of mass extermination that would go on to last 8 full years. The Fiends are ferocious foes, seemingly somehow crystalline entities. They're capable of morphing their bodies into all manners of horrific and lethal shapes, even able to craft weaponry capable of injuring and killing Space Marines in full power armor. Their outward appearance is that of pallid, ghoulish-like aliens with glowing crystals and a pair of bright red eyes. Which, does seem awfully suspicious, doesn't it? The Death Specters, pallid, bright red eyes, entombing themselves under a weird glass throne. And an enemy that can't seem to ever be truly defeated as they keep re-emerging. Although there's a lot more Sith or Fiends than the Death Specters have ever suffered casualties incomplete, so I'm not saying that they are the Fiends. I'm just saying that the throne might have had previous occupants, okay? There might have been a resurrection. The chalice might have become full once or twice before, but speculation. After a long and hard period of extended fighting, the Black Templars and the Death Specters reached Grave Core yet again. A massive gas giant planet with several huge crystalline fortresses hanging in the upper atmosphere. The Black Templars assaulted these fortresses as they had done on countless planets before, but this time they found, just like the Death Specters had many years ago, nothing. No defenders, no enemies, no women or children, if the fiends even have them. Nothing to fight, nothing to defeat. Only empty, echoing halls of cold, dead crystal. That was not what the Black Templars wanted to find. And in their outrage at being apparently denied their prey, they attempted to destroy Gravecore itself, the entire planet, but the planet appeared strangely resistant to any and all tactics the Black Templars chose to employ. Exterminatus-scale ordnance simply sank into its endless gas clouds and seemingly either didn't detonate or failed to have sufficient force to rupture the planet or to scatter or damage it in some way. They attempted to set the atmosphere on fire, as all readings indicated that this would be possible, but even with an entire fleet lance-striking and deploying incendiaries into the atmosphere, the fire would burn, it would flare briefly, and then die down, unless the fleet continued to pour fire into it. No further attempts to destroy the planet could be carried out because that was right about the time that Gazgul Margorok Thraka decided to visit Armageddon for the second time. I was about to say the third there. Anyways, the Sitar Fiends, of course, returned. How? No one quite knows. There have been theories that they are at least partially warp-capable creatures. After all, they've managed to move around already. They could simply have loaded themselves aboard presumed starships and fled, deeper into the fringes of the Ghoul stars, or even out into the cold, vast darkness beyond the solar system, and then chilled out there until they could return. Alternatively, being crystalline creatures, well, that's hardly normal, is it? They could have shifted off into some second dimension. Or mayhaps they were actually all killed and are now reconstituting somewhere, or waiting for more food from a certain throne somewhere, perhaps. Regardless, the Sitar Fiends will inevitably return, and once they do, the Death Specters will be there to keep them contained yet again, as that is the inevitable path of their lives and continued resistance against the cold, uncaring void out on the very fringes of the Imperium. Something the Death Specters understand well and embrace. They do not worship death in the same way as some chapters do, but they understand that they are space marines. Their lives are going to end in blood and violence. It is inevitable. In fact, a successful end to their service is just that. Best case scenario, it will end upon the mysterious throne that grants them their special powers. Any other scenario, it will hopefully end in a brilliant last stand against overwhelming odds. Perhaps even they will attain the high honor of becoming part of the chapter's elites. The Wargeists, the venerable first company that wield power scythes. Oh, are we really going to be doubling down on that whole Raven and Guard Origins thing? Because, I don't know. Although there are some similarities with their alleged founding chapter as well, such as, for example, the fact that they favor fast assault units to a degree not exactly endorsed by the Codex Astartes, shall we say. As on previous occasions, the chapter has been known to deploy 6 entire companies, all with jump packs and close quarters weaponry. And, well, they're also a chapter operating on the fringes of the Imperium, so vehicles are probably going to be in short supply. Not that many Forge Worlds out there, so they probably can't rely on luxuries like rhinos or land raiders to carry them about. A heavy focus on rapid-moving assault units makes a tremendous amount of sense, particularly considering their favoured weapon of their first company as well. And with the added benefit of occasionally getting little messages from the future, a nice, fast-paced and aggressive style of warfare can no doubt be a big advantage for the Death Specters. And speaking of the fringes, where do the Death Specters get their replacements from? After all, Imperial civilization out here is thin, to put it mildly. Well, they have a rather fascinating little ritual. They steal women. just straight up. I'm not kidding. They go around to various nearby worlds looking for exceptional gene strains, lineages that have in the past produced excellent warriors or men of great renown. Women of these familiar lines are then recruited and brought home to their breeding worlds. Damn. I wonder where they get the men from. Presumably they, attempt to find high-quality men as well to actually, literally attempt to breed super soldiers. And considering how often the Imperium is at absolute all-out war, that's not exactly a silly idea. In fact, you'd think that a lot more chapters and a lot more Imperial organizations as well would probably have embraced this idea quite some time ago. I mean, if you're in a constant state of total all-out war, breeding farms doesn't sound like the craziest idea in the universe. Although, as I've said on multiple occasions previously, the majority of the Imperium is actually in a state of peace, near constantly. Sure, it's still riven by war constantly in other places, but the majority of the Imperium is still protected deep beneath dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of barriers of fleets and armies and outposts and astartes chapters, etc., usually only threatened by relatively minor Xenos empires, marauding orcs or pirates or chaos bands and things like that. So, maybe the breeding farm is considered a pinch extreme for most systems, and fair enough. Though they also have another couple intriguing traditions as well. Once their breeding farms has produced a adequately tough candidate, then at the age of 10, such a malleable age, they poison them to death. Jesus. Now, they do begin the implementation process of the Space Marine gene seed, etc., first, mind you, to give them at least a fighting chance, but they literally do inject them with lethal toxins, and they do nothing to purge the toxins from their system. Their now enhanced physiology, or at least the beginnings of it, will have to fight off the toxins on their own. Whilst they are doing this, they experience a phenomenon known as the First Death, where they become drowned in the Black River. The Black River is a phenomenon well known to the Death Specters. The river Styx, the path to the afterlife, or some sort of deep connection to the future, to their chapter's shared heritage. As librarians as well must enter this river for a third time. Assuming that the initiate survives the first death, they will undergo a second one later in their career. after having survived the first death, and their training as a neophyte, and their elevation to the ranks of a full astartes, with all of the surgeries and procedures involved in that, once all of that is finished, and they stand ready to become a full initiate into the chapter, they undergo a second death. This time, the dosage is upped significantly. The first death is supposed to only last for a handful of minutes before the astartes form should be able to fight off the toxins, presuming the Black River doesn't pull them under, of course. But the second death can last for hours, and potentially even days at a time, as the initiate is intended to struggle deeply with the identity of the chapter, the Black River as a phenomenon, its connection to the future and the past, with the ideas of rebirth, of being recreated as something new, leaving their old life behind and becoming, quite literally, a spectre of death. There might also be some additional nonsense with the dosage going on here, as there are supposed mentions of demons in the river. Now, whether or not that is a spiritual sort of demon, wrestling with one's own misgivings, etc., or literal demons, considering that they will be technically dead for a period, is unclear, although, considering everything else about the Death Specters, I wouldn't be surprised if they were actual demons. And only librarians will need to undergo a third death, even deeper and even more complete. And this is only done if they wish to attain the lofty rank of codicier. At this point as well, they are expected to be in near full command of their psychic powers, and be able to aid the Death Specters in delving the depths of the future, riding and controlling the Black River rather than merely surviving it. And this, too, is where their specific abilities of implanting information points into the future become more important to their career as librarians. These are most certainly a unique set of beliefs, definitely. Overtly creepy, no doubt. Suspicious as ever-living hell, one might even say. But the Death Specters' service record has so far been exemplary. They also have not demonstrated any other uncomfortable habits. And hey, compared to certain other chapter traditions like, bathing in the blood of thousands of servants, I mean, it's not that bad. Although there is one fascinating little additional piece of knowledge. The blade, the relic weapon that were in the hands of Merian Coracadus as he received his sacred vision, the Arcuman, was given up by the chapter. Now, the precise circumstances around this are a little bit diffuse, but the chief librarian at the time granted the Arcuman, the relic blade, probably, quite likely, the single most sacred relic in the entire chapter, to librarian Leandro Caras, upon his selection to go join the Death Watch. Which, of course, would mean that he would have to leave the chapter. Now, Leandro served the Death Watch capably and brought much glory and honor to his chapter, but to grant an artifact like this to a Marine that was leaving, how very, 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 very odd. And considering that it was the placing of this blade at the Emperor's golden throne that brought about the vision, well, mayhaps the chief librarian at the time saw something uncomfortable in the blade, or in some vision, or some warning, or some glimpse perhaps even in the Black River, that made him desire to send the sword far away from the chapter. Who knows? Who knows indeed? But for now, despite my many misgivings, the Death Specters remain a perfectly loyal chapter of the God Emperor's Astartes that deviate a tiny bit from the Codex Astartes, sure, and who have some peculiar seating arrangements, yes, and their enemies are a little bit suspicious in that they have some of their own features, etc., and the whole mummifying of the dead and the eventual resurrection, but so long as they never actually turn into an army of undead space marines with tremendous psychic powers, it's all good, and the Ghoul stars will be allowed to live another day, another decade, another century or millennia even, all under the watchful eyes, glowing coal red in the darkness of the Death Specters. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope to see all of you again soon. Till then, have a good day.